You're listening to Melanin Matters Black History Month special on WTBU, the beat of Boston University. The song that you just heard is from a new audio and visual project, recognizing the legacy of one of the most traumatic instances of oppression in global history.
The Transatlantic Journey is a new 12-track album and graphic set by musician, theologian, and psychologist Dr. Jerome Critchin. The project is a culmination of 4.5 years of sociological research into the transatlantic slave trade.
The Equal Justice Initiative says the transatlantic slave trade took place between 1501 and 1867 when Europeans and Americans kidnapped and trafficked almost 13 million Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. Nearly 2 million of them died, while the rest were enslaved and abused.
Transatlantic Journey shares their stories through Afrofusion jazz, and as Dr. Crichton tells us, the project started as a way for him to prepare for a course he teaches.
Sociocultural diversity, African American psychology. Essentially, it's a course about why Black people behave the way they behave and why they have the attitudes they have, which is basically what psychology is, the behavioral sciences. And I discovered in my, reflecting on it, that there's no way to really understand Black behavior, African American behavior, without understanding white oppression. Because Black behavior is largely a response to white oppression. So I began, preparing for the course. Eventually, it led to, probably around the third time I taught the course, my desire to write a book on the subject, coming at it from the perspective of white pathology as really the impetus to Black behavior. And I got about 6 chapters in and then started to get into this real deep sort of funk, this depression, because of the things that I was reading about the atrocities and so on. And I stopped. And I at that point, I really couldn't write anymore. I needed an outlet for what I was experiencing. And the outlet became this project. I began composing the music out of that need for therapy, if I can put it in those terms. And Transatlantic Journey was born.
So how did working on this project kind of become, was it kind of therapeutic throughout? How did it kind of really mend to those things that you were feeling and experiencing?
The music was an outlet. I would say that I was talking basically to a non-existent audience the way that a patient would speak to a therapist. That's what the music provided. It was the avenue for letting out what I had experienced, what I was experiencing, and what I was hoping for. So much of the focus became the resilience, the hope, the sense of adventure, even under those circumstances. And that's what I think, ended up being reflected in the project. And so that's why it was so therapeutic.
That's interesting because, the transatlantic slave trade, the MAPA, was just this devastating thing. And so many people, myself included, we see it as just this very devastating, heavy thing. But you're offering kind of this perspective where you're seeing both this dual thing of this horrible oppression that happened to them, but also this resilience and this hope. Can you talk about that and kind of the duality of that?
I think it's really important, especially now, in this contemporary time, to recognize that when we look closely at the history, we discover that our greatest achievements as a people have come under the worst of circumstances. And so when we think about resilience or hope, that is the contextual framework for it, oppression. It's the reason why, we have a certain rhythm to the way we are as a people. It's why we talk about soul, it's why we talk about the freedom that is reflected in jazz music. All of this came out of the bowels of oppression, if I can use that that phrase. And so that's what, to me, makes this project so special, that It looked at the history, it looked at the pain, it looked at the suffering, it looked at the trauma, and it says, okay, what has been birthed from this and how do we pass it on?
What is making this project kind of birthed within you? And kind of has anything changed within you? Has anything kind of developed within you?
Yeah, so I would have to say that the research that I'm doing along with this project has confirmed for me the values that in some ways get lost amongst Africans of the diaspora. There is this seduction that is always held out that is reflective of what I call the white pathological framework, where we devalue ourselves in order to strive for standards that are often superficial or that don't necessarily reflect what is best for us as a people. So there is this renewal within me, this resurgence of energy toward self-value, the value of our experience, the value of our history, the value of our legacy, and then the challenge to be able to pass that on.
Wow, that's really incredible. You mentioned that the project kind of reflects these transitions into kind of the new and unfamiliar, and also the challenges that come with it. And you kind of mentioned that some of this was derived, of course, from the slave trade, but also from parts of your own experience. And I guess I kind of want to know, what are some of these challenges that come with the transitions, and what are some of the ways in which you're doing this project, you've kind of seen the through line, you're moving through that tunnel and moving through those challenges?
When I was 12 years of age, I was born and raised in England. And when I was 12 years of age, or just a little before that, maybe, my parents decided that they were going to move from England to the United States. And at the age of 12, you're right there on the cusp of adolescence. It was somewhat of a traumatic experience for me because I was leaving my friends to go to a place that I didn't know anything about. And I sort of paralleled and conflated that with the experience that the Africans must have felt in some sense, being torn away from the only life that they knew, the only people that they really loved, and being in this situation where they were abducted. One of the tracks on the album is called The First Night, which is a reflection on what that feeling was, the first night of being away from home, from those you loved, from everything you knew. And so there is this narrative throughout the tracks that reflects that experience.
What track is most close and personal to you?
That's really hard. That's like having 12 children and saying which one most. Each of them have a very deep meaning for me because they each reflect a very important part of my journey and the journey of our ancestors. So I don't know that I can pick one, but The First Night, because it has a very deep blues presentation, really does speak to my heart about that feeling that you have when you're away from everything that's familiar.
Yeah. Um, Thinking more broadly now, what do you want people to take away from this project? Whether they're listening in this moment that we're in right now of a lot of political change, or if they're listening many, many years beyond, what do you want people to take away?
I'd like people to take away from this our genius. With just crumbs, we've created and invented so much. And at the root of that genius is our spiritual connection. Anything we've done has come out of that connection. We can't lose sight of how meaningful and significant it is to our future. So when people listen to the project and also look at the artwork, which reflects that, done by our great graphic artist, Deborah Brewer, and the photography behind it, the great photographer, Ronald Pollard. I want them to get a sense of what will be responsible for our success going forward. We've got to be very careful that we are not seduced by those things that don't reflect our experience, right? I'm not talking about isolationism. I'm talking about self-value, right? Divesting of this need to feel like we need to be hyper vigilant, to make other people feel comfortable around us for fear of their discomfort. So this presents this notion of resilience and also the notion of hope, that we can be very hopeful about our future.
And that was Dr. Jerome Crichton. We thank him so much for speaking with us. You can purchase Transatlantic Journey online at www.transatlanticjourney.com. The project will not be available on streaming services because, as Dr. Crichton says, companies like Spotify and Amazon are paying artists poorly, and he would actually like to benefit from the time and effort he and his team put into this project.
Transatlantic Journey, now available at www.transatlanticjourney.com.